All right. I apologize if you hear my fan in the background. It's pretty toasty in here. Um, I don't know if the heater broke to where mine's set at 120 degrees, but I think it is. So I apologize for that. But I wanted to, this is a class I have taught a couple times before online. One is a night class, and then I think another time. No, I think the other time was when we were here. Obviously, online presents challenges for this class a little bit because we do look at some films and then we look at the literature that it's based on. So the film part can get a little bit harder when you're online especially if you wanted to see like the whole film. So I've worked around that. And I just wanted to say too, I know when we did it here, we were a little bit heavier on the film side of it. And when we switched online, the literature picks up a little bit more. So you will be doing some reading in this class. I wanted to start out with that. I did read through so far those that have turned in the first question. That was something new I wanted to do this term. I'm always trying to kind of grow the class and keep adding things as I teach it more and more, and that's with all my classes. So I really wanted to get to, I know sometimes some of these classes I've been teaching besides math, sometimes the expectations coming in are different than what the class is, and so I felt like it would be a good way to kind of reach out and say, okay, what things are you looking forward to learning, if you know of any, or some things that you dread about, and we can maybe address that here at the beginning. I know with my music class, one main hurdle I have to do with that is, a lot of times students maybe think they have to sing or play an instrument, and definitely not. I mean, that's the thing about music. To appreciate it, you don't have to participate in it. You can appreciate it just by listening, or just even being a part of it. Now, some students too, always, am I going to learn about an instrument? I usually do show some things on an instrument, but it's not an instrument class. In 8 weeks, that would almost be impossible. But as film and literature is kind of the same aspect of that. I mean, there's so many ways that you can look at different things with film and different things with literature. What we really focus on in this class is how to compare the adaptations. So, you always hear that saying, I've heard it a lot on the street when I talk to people about this class. No, I don't. I usually talk to people about math classes when I run into them on the street. No, that's a joke as well. But usually you hear that saying, well, the book's much better. You see a movie that the book is famous and someone will be like, oh, the book's much better. And a lot of times for me, that is the case. I enjoy the books usually more, but sometimes I think that's just said to be like, hey, I read the book. But usually when you look at it and you're comparing the two, you usually are comparing in the way, which one's better, which one's not. That's not my goal in this class, is to say, well, this is going to end up always being better, or this is going to, the film's always better, or even to compare film to book of the ones that we're doing. I think the main thing, as far as that I will always be going back to and reiterating each time, is what were the choices that they made to usually make that book or that literature. It's not always a book, and we'll talk about that here in a second. That literature into a film. What choices did they make and why? So, that could be a whole bunch of different reasons. Time constraints is always one. A book you could go on as long as you want. You could have an 800-page book. No one's there to stop you. But usually with a movie, a studio is going to, if it starts to get in over that 2.5 hour, usually, they're shut down. Now, there's cases where there's been like 3-hour movies, and, usually it's a big deal because it's like, wow, I got to sit through a movie for 3 hours. So time constraints is a big thing that usually, that's why people say they like books better a lot of times, is because you've got more time to go through and really develop the characters and the story, whereas the movie's got to fit a lot in a short amount of time. And if you think, wow, but you could fit in a lot in 2.5, 3 hours, that's true. But I've been in a process of making movies, or not movies like studio movies, but just putting together little clippets of something and I think I just made up a word, clippets, but putting together clips of something and doing it, and you don't realize how fast time can be ate up with that. I did like a photography thing once, so I put all these pictures together and I used music, and I thought, okay, I want to get this, and then pretty soon I was like in an hour, it was like an hour long, and I'm like, wow, that's really long. So it can go really quick, and so, when a director or a producer or whoever's making the movie has to make those decisions, a lot of times that's what makes it to where they make changes, or they condense something, or they change something. But there's all different kinds of reasons, and we're going to be getting into that as we go along and comparing. Obviously, there is just, an endless supply of books and movies that we could choose from that we could compare. So, that's kind of a little bit up to my choice. Like I said, we could choose from so many, and I know the first time I taught this, we were so excited because I co-taught it, and both of us had all these movies we wanted to pick, and it was like, oh man, there's so many. That's the side that I am more familiar with, as far as I have grown up always watching old movies. I personally, on a personal level, just like them better. I felt like the acting was better, the dialogue was better, they spent more time, making the movie better, as opposed to maybe just, let's watch this blow up and this computer thing, and that's just personal taste. But that's something that I felt like I've grown up with that, so there's a lot of knowledge that I have just on personal watching of films and stuff, and just hearing and reading about movies and reading about actors and actresses that I liked. So some of that will be coming into this class, because I'll be sharing, hey, this is why this person did this, or reading about this movie, this is why this director did this. So some of that's going to be in here too. As far as the literature that we will be kind of looking at, I tried to pick a variety. So, I know one that we will do, at different times. I always do usually a suspenseful movie, and how a book can be suspenseful, but then how a movie can be suspenseful. And then usually I do a children's book, and that's where some of the literature is different, because a children's book, is written differently than a novel would be. And so that movie usually too has to be different. You watch a children's movie, and it's going to have a different goal, I would say, than just a movie. So those are some of the variety. I know at Christmas time I taught this class once, and we looked at some holiday movies, because that is a theme of certain kinds of movies that are just to that theme. So there's going to be some of those things. There's all different kinds of literature. It doesn't have to just necessarily be a book. It could be a magazine, article. We've looked at before, like a comic book character. Someone just walked by there, dude. There's lots of different things. Comic books, are huge right now in the movies, and I enjoy some of those. But that's where, that's a literature that's been adapted to screen. And so those are the things that we're going to be looking at in this class. I do a couple things as far as class work. Make sure now, when we start getting into the actual classwork and the test, a lot of this will be essay and writing. Now, this is an English class. You get an English credit, so there will be reading and writing. That's part of it. As far as grammar, that's not what this class is. I'm not going to be going through and saying, well, you didn't put this period in the right spot, and you didn't put a comma in the right spot. So don't necessarily get caught up, oh man, I got to make this look pretty. Now, I do want you to try, as you learn in other classes, this may be your first English class, so that's why I'm not necessarily focusing on the grammar part of it. But as you progress with your writing, you want to make sure that you are working on that aspect, that you're trying to make it to where it's got that aspect to it, where you're trying to put the periods and commas in the right spots. But I'm not going to be grading those based on that. I do ask that, one rule that I've always kept is, because I'm not a huge grammar fan, where I have English certification, but that's not necessarily something I enjoy even doing, is going through it and saying, oh, this comma's got to be here and there, because sometimes to me the rules change mid-game. You know, you're like, oh, I thought it was supposed to be there, and then it changed. But I do ask, one thing that I do when I write something is I read it aloud, and I usually try to find someone else besides me to read through it. The reason for that is, if you've ever done this before, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll write something and you know what you're trying to say. And so when you read it, your brain fixes the mistakes for you. I've even had it where I've repeated words. I've said like you and then you right afterwards. But my brain, because I know what I was trying to say, I just read one you. And someone else reads it and they go, whoa, why'd you repeat? And so sometimes that will help. Have someone else read it and just don't try to influence them, have it read it, and then see if they know, if they can understand what you were trying to say. And two, when you, because I've, talked to students about movies and I've talked to students about things, and usually they have great time, being able to portray what they want to say, and they talk, and you have deep discussions. But when they go to write it, it's like they condense it all to one sentence. And you would not, if you were discussing a film or discussing a book with someone or discussing anything, you wouldn't just say, well, this is my one sentence and that's it. You would elaborate. You would go deeper into those, why you said that, why you disagree with me. And that's what I'm going for. I don't necessarily care if you disagree with something an opinion part, if I'm talking about my opinion of a movie and you say, well, you know what, I didn't quite get that. I just want you to explain why and get into the details of why. Don't just say, well, I don't think that, or well, tell me why, because then we can have that discussion and that learning process can continue. So I said all that, I expounded a lot there, to say when you have an essay question posed to you, especially on a test, make sure you are putting quite a bit of material, as best as you can, to explain your answer. So make sure you are describing why or not you think the way you do on the question that I pose. So, make sure you're filling that in to the best of your ability. And that's when I grade, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is did they explain mainly what they were looking for, not the grammar of it, but are they, telling me why or not they agree or disagree with something. And so that will be a lot of what the work is going through that. Now, because this is an everyday class, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it's every day, some of the reading material will take up a good portion of the class time. So there will be from time to time on a day that I just say, okay, here's your reading portion, and I want you to comment that you read, and that will be your attendance. Now, not all the time. So always read through the full announcement when I post something for the reading part, because other times I'll post some questions with the reading, and that will be your assignment and attendance. So really pay attention to that. If it says just comment, underneath that you read, then that's all you have to do. If it says there's going to be questions, make sure you answer those questions to turn that in. Okay, so this class will mainly be that reading and then class questions, and also some of the film clips that I'll include to watch to compare those two. I'm excited. I get excited just talking about movies. I also like to read. I read less than I used to, as far as when I was in school and growing up. I just constantly was in a book. But as far as now, just time and just different, reasons, I don't necessarily sit down and read a full book or something at a time. I'm kind of catching little I'm going to use that word again that I made up, clippets here and there. So that's kind of where I have knowledge of those things, but I'm going to be, my side would be based on the film a lot more, giving history of those things. One of the first ones that we're going to look at, like I said, and so I'm giving you a little preview of our first assignment and kind of getting into that, is, Hitchcock films. If you've ever heard of him, he was a director that he made a lot of suspenseful films. They were older, so we're talking in the time period. Now, he was from England, so he made movies in England before he came to America and started making movies. And so really his American movies started hitting about 1939, 1940, and went through the 50s and 60s. I believe he made some in the 60s there at the end. And so that is the time period we're looking at. But he was very ahead of his time as far as his directorial style. So movies were all kind of made in one way, and then as he came along, he definitely had a definite style that stood out. And so I grew up on his films. I liked watching a lot of them. They had a lot of my favorite actors and actresses in them. They were suspenseful, but they weren't, I'm not big into like just showing everything where it's scary and all that kind of stuff. This was more just like building suspense. And so for me, that was a fascinating part of the movie, is how could you build suspense just from just the music or just the way the actors were looking. And so the first story that we'll be reading is based on one of my favorite, I wouldn't say my favorite Hitchcock film, but one of my favorites. And the story is a short story. I did this one before, and I tried to cut it off. Like I was going to have the students read so much of it, and students were writing me like, I've got to finish this story. So I've went to where we pretty much read the whole story, and then we look at scenes that we compare to. So to give you a heads up, that's what we're going to be beginning with, where you'll be reading the story. It's a short story, it's not a novel or anything. And so you'll be reading portions each day, and then we'll be comparing the film and starting our questions from there. As always, if you have any questions, you can email me on the People part of the Google Classroom. If you go to People, you can see my name as the teacher. You can always send me an email if you have any questions. Make sure you're signing in each day, at least checking through. If something comes up, let me know. But that's where I keep that attendance. It has to be each day, so stick at it, and hopefully we'll enjoy this. I enjoyed the responses that you guys had, the enthusiasm there as far as what you're looking for into this class. And so we'll have a good term. Thank you, guys.